Well, those tax day protests getting raucous over President Trump's tax returns. President Trump himself responding on Twitter saying, quote, someone should look into who paid for the small organized rallies. The election is over. Well, here to debate it out, Democratic strategist David Bernstein, Trump fundraiser John Tatum, and Independent Women's Forum Patricia Lee Onwuka. Patrice, let me start with you. Do voters at this point really care about President Trump's tax returns?
I don't think they do. I mean, we've seen some Gallup polling at the beginning of this year that it was a concern. But as we've seen the Trump administration make some different headways, I think people are less concerned. And just looking at the size of the crowds, these are people who are really just anti-Trump, and they'll latch on to anything to get at him.
John Tatum, I agree. I don't know that there's a major, groundswell of public sentiment that they must see the release. But from a political point of view, since at some points on the campaign they were promised, should the president put that into consideration?
Well, Charles, I agree with Patrice. I don't think it's an issue. That was all litigated in the election, right? I mean, and he won. I think people are more concerned with their taxes and do they get a tax break and do we get tax relief from this Congress? So I agree with Patrice. I don't think that his taxes are an issue. And Charles, I might remind you that don't we have the same IRS commissioner today that we had back several months ago that was leaking a lot of information about Republican donors' taxes? So does anybody believe that if there is one issue with President Trump's taxes, that wouldn't be all over this leaky swamp called Washington?
So you think Koskinen would have leaked them somewhere by now?
I think those taxes would be all over the place if there was an issue with President Trump's taxes, I can assure you.
David, so what do you make of this? Because those protests, although small, were ugly, violent scenes.
Well, look, I mean, there's no question that Democrats are still very upset, and I think rightly so, that we've had the first president in modern history to not release his taxes, particularly when there are so many questions about the president's allegiances, who he's indebted to, and what kind of business he's done over the years, how much taxes he's actually paid. We have known a little bit of information about it.
Well, we saw one year, right, that was pretty impressive. He paid a higher tax rate than Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders.
That's right. But the fact that he hasn't released his taxes and broken with this precedent is something that people should be, still obviously concerned about. But I don't think it's actually going to do anything because it's clear that he's not going to release that information to anybody. He has no desire to do it, and there's no law that says he has to do it. It's just a tradition. But this is a president who's been clearly unafraid to break with a lot of traditions and conventions that we've had, and that's, I think, some of the reason that people on the right are giving him credit for it.
Patrice, what do you make when a group of people show up at a protest and their faces are covered, they're wearing all black, and it doesn't feel like old school, like a hippie signs, and it's not your traditional protest, is it?
They're there to be disruptive, and they're there to push a certain agenda that frankly looks very violent. I mean, if you really are taking seriously the idea that the president's taxes should be released, then the images we're seeing right now does nothing to help that agenda. I do think it's interesting, though, there are a lot of older people who are in the crowd, people who've been paying taxes for decades and are probably tired, of having to pay such high taxes. If anything, this gives us a good conversation to talk about tax reform, where I think all Americans can agree that we need lower taxes and so that we don't have to pay as much.
Yeah, to your point, if they had a legitimate tax protests, I would have been out there too. Hey, John, you pay a lot of taxes. What are we going to do about that, by the way? The market stalled. We're up big today, but that's sort of a rebound. We're well off the highs set just a month ago, 2 months ago. This whole tax thing, there's so much focus, the media gives so much focus to this kind of nonsense, but I want to circle back perhaps to a point you brought earlier, that the majority of us would like to see lower taxes, particularly after the Obama administration.
Yeah, Charles, I agree. I think the real issue is not President Trump's taxes, it's the American people's taxes. And the Republican Party, if it had been me, I would have got some points on the board and maybe gone with tax reform before health care. But, I'm not running things, and wiser people chose to do healthcare reform. But, Charles, we've got to get tax relief for the American people. And and corporations in this country. And if the Republican-led Senate, Congress, the House, and the White House can't all three get together soon, there'll be a bigger problem than these protests in Berkeley.
No doubt about it. Although, speaking of these protests, I saw a few people. I was in a city real quick, and David, with the tax sign protests, I got a feeling it's going to be a long, hot summer and spring across these Democratic, liberal, progressive cities, and I think it's going to turn very ugly if this is just a precursor. What do you think?
I think you're right about that, because the president has shown no desire to actually try and become president of the entire country. He is still playing very much to a base, and people.
So you're going to blame the president for what we saw in Berkeley yesterday?
I think there's equal fault to go around. I think the president has not tried to reach out to what is clearly a very, very divided country. He ran on a promise of uniting the country. He said that the night that he was elected, and neither side has really cooled down since the election. So it's going to be a long, hot summer for sure.
Patrice, we are a divided country, but it's a whole different set of circumstances. When you start talking about violence, though, I don't know how the perpetrators of violence continue to point to the White House for their actions.
That's just a scapegoat that they're using. I mean, what's interesting also with these rallies is that every single movement that's out there is trying to latch onto them. We saw Black Lives Matter join tag onto one of the protests. You know, and again, it's not getting at what the issue is, which Americans do care about taxes right now, and over half think that our tax system is unfair. You know, that's an area where we can all come together on. I'm just not sure, you know, compared to my progressive colleague, that, you know, the left is really willing to come to the table and have serious discussions.
All right, guys, it's a real interesting, trying time here. I appreciate all of you. Appreciate it.